welcome back to Pages from the Past. Tonight, you'll journey through the ancient city of Rome. Not for a war, not for an emperor, but for a loaf of bread. A loaf that leans to the left. A loaf that maybe, just maybe, makes the gods frown. You'll walk Roman streets before sunrise. You'll meet bakers, dream readers, midwives, and augurs. You'll hold bread that whispers. And you'll wonder why people once feared a swirl of crust turning the wrong way. If this is your first time here, make yourself cozy, blanket, tea, soft lights. Leave a comment with where you're listening from in your current local time. And now, let's ease into tonight's journey. The morning begins, as most ancient Roman mornings do, not with grandeur, but with quiet persistence. The whisper of wind curls through narrow alleyways of limestone, weaving between stories etched in stone and sandals worn to memory. The air greets you not with flourish, but with honest smells, crushed olives, damp stone, and bread just beginning to burn. There's comfort in that. In things slightly overcooked, slightly imperfect. You stand at the edge of a narrow Roman street, wrapped not just in a cloak, but in that soft beige light that only exists when the world is still stretching awake, sunlight smeared like sponge on parchment sky. A dog yawns on a step nearby. It doesn't care that it's 17 BCE. You do, but just barely. Because something about this morning feels fragile. Like a thought you almost forgot to think. The cobbled street beneath your feet isn't even. The stones shift gently, like memories not quite laid straight, each one placed by someone long dead who maybe, just maybe, didn't believe in straight lines. Down the lane, a vendor is already locked in combat over cabbages. The argument is loud, passionate, ridiculous, and somehow deeply human. It's personal. It's eternal. It always is with Romans. Before we begin, a soft little suggestion. If this story, with its old bread and mild anxieties, makes you feel a little less alone, maybe tap that like button. And if your eyelids are heavy but your mind is curious, tell us where you're listening from. Bed? Bath? A couch that became a bed and forgot to change back? Wherever you are, you made it here. And that matters. Fair warning though, you probably won't make it through this day. Let's walk together anyway. You step into Subura, the working-class heartbeat of Rome. It's early, but already the city hums, a kind of messy harmony, as if every cracked tile and shouting child is part of some ancient symphony. A fishmonger sings. Badly. But with conviction. You smile, because it's too early not to forgive off-key joy. A woman is sweeping her stoop with a broom made of bundled reeds and generational disappointment. She doesn't say a word, but the way she looks at your sandals makes you want to apologize to her ancestors. You lower your gaze. Keep walking. Some judgments don't need to be spoken. You feel them anyway. This part of the city is damp, chaotic, alive, like a living poem scribbled in rush and dust. A cart filled with amphory creaks by, each wheel groaning as if carrying the weight of centuries. Behind it, a barefoot boy trails, humming something ancient and strange. Is it a psalm? A spell? You'll never know. But it catches in your ears and settles in your chest like a memory you don't remember having. You turn down a quieter street. Here, the noise softens. The walls draw close like whispered secrets, and sunlight breaks through in golden shards, gentle, sacred, like hope. You pass warm stone. You smell yeast rising. Someone is baking. The scent pulls you forward, not by force, but by comfort. That tangy, sleepy aroma of rising flour, cracked crust, and shared mornings. You reach a pastrinum, a Roman bakery. It's humble. Square walls. Blackened chimney. A wooden door that closes like it's thinking too hard about its decisions. Inside, it's not busy, just purposeful. There's a donkey powering the round mill, and he looks like he's seen every mistake humanity has made and decided not to judge. Loaves line the shelves, round, marked, neat, sliced into sections, like pizza before joy. You speak to the baker. His name is Cato. Cato is the kind of man who wears silence like armor. He's wary this morning. Someone asked for bread. With the left hand, he mutters, as if the words themselves might curse the dough. You hesitate. Why is that a problem? He squints. Not unkindly. Just long enough to make you question your entire upbringing. Left-handed bread brings the evil eye. You don't ask how bread has hands. You know better. You won't win this one. Still, there's something ancient in his fear. Something sacred. Bread here isn't just food, it's a ritual, a belief system needed into daily life. He shows you the bakery's stamp, a spiral etched into a wooden paddle. It looks like a sleeping snail, or a galaxy, or a question no one's ready to answer. And here's where history sighs a little. Did you know that Roman bakers marked their bread before baking, like sculptors or proud parents? Everyone shared ovens, so the stamp wasn't just practical. It was personal. Identity baked into crust. Cato tells you the last time someone disrespected bread, his oven cracked. Coincidence? He doesn't think so. He replaced it anyway. And part of you, the rational part, rolls its eyes. But the other part, the part that believes in gut feelings and old women's warnings, stores the memory away. Just in case. You thank Cato. He nods like a man who has survived more than bread. You step back into sunlight. The bakery fades. The scent lingers. The stones beneath your feet are still uneven, but they're no longer foreign. They've welcomed you now. You belong. You breathe in, slowly. There are worse places to be than ancient Rome. Worse lives to live than this quiet morning of bread, superstition, and dusty laughter. Even if, somewhere out there, the bread is watching. You walk downhill now, toward the edge of the neighborhood where the tenement buildings rise like layered cakes, stacked high, slightly leaning, and full of secrets. The kind of buildings that creak when nobody's home. Here, the streets get narrower. Laundry flaps above you like lazy pigeons. Somewhere nearby, someone is singing about lentils and betrayal. Not necessarily in that order. You pass a water fountain. The lake is sub-Uranus, carved from pale stone. Burbles with spring water piped from miles away through Rome's aqueducts. It's a marvel of engineering. It's also where most people do their laundry, wash their vegetables, and, sometimes, cool their armpits when they think no one is looking. You look. The man nods in awkward acknowledgement. You nod back. You're heading now to see someone important. Or at least he thinks he is. His name is Lucilius, and he's a flour merchant. Which means he controls what people bake, and that gives him the smug confidence of a man who has never been without carbs. Lucilius's shop is just a stall, really. A sun-bleached tarp stretched over wooden beams, with sacks of flour stacked like silent sentries. He offers you a taste, raw spelt flour on the tip of a knife. It tastes like chalk had an idea and gave up halfway. You politely pretend it's delicious. He tells you that spelt is the future. That barley is for cowards. That if Jupiter himself had a favorite grain, it would be this one. You do not argue. Major historical fact, Romans consumed a lot of grain. The average citizen received a grain ration as part of the state welfare system. The Annona ensured that no one starved, at least, not from lack of bread. Riots still happened when shipments were late, though. Imagine running out of toast and overthrowing a console. Lucilius hands you a small, round loaf. It's cold, dense, and stamped with yesterday's date. But it's free, so you hold it like it matters. He leans in and asks if you've ever heard of left-kneaded dough. You nod, vaguely. He smirks. That's the dough cursed by Mercury himself. Baked with the left hand while the right is idle. Makes the bread rise sideways, and the house spirits angry. Obscure tidbit. In some rural Roman traditions, baking had ritual components. Flour was sifted with prayers, and the oven was sometimes saluted. Left-hand mixing was discouraged, not just for superstition, but because the left side was seen as unclean. Unless you were born left-handed, in which case, you simply worked harder to pretend otherwise. Lucilius says his neighbor once made left-kneaded bread. She found snakes in her attic the next morning. He gestures vaguely toward the gods. Coincidence, he asks. You sigh. Probably. Historians still debate whether the left-hand bias in Roman cooking was a borrowed Etruscan practice, or just one of those charming pan-Mediterranean quirks that nobody bothered to document clearly. Lucilius wishes you well and tells you to avoid any bakeries with cracked oven tiles. You thank him and turn back toward the tenement slope, where a delivery mule just refuses to move. Two men shout at it with Latin that sounds mostly made up. The mule looks tired of empires. You feel tired too. A gentle breeze slips through the alley. The sun tilts in the sky like it's thinking about dinner. You nibble the cold loaf in your hand. It is slightly better than it looks. The shadows stretch longer now. You continue walking, bread in one hand, Roman dust on your sandals, and a creeping suspicion that your left hand is causing cosmic imbalance. Don't worry. It probably isn't. But you never know in this city. You wander northward, away from the tangled streets of Subura, where the shadows have grown deeper and more committed. The light is softer now, sliding down walls like warm honey, and your cold loaf is slowly turning into a hand warmer. You pass a row of market stalls that are, technically speaking, still open, but emotionally, they've checked out. A few leftover onions. A wilted garland of herbs. One very alert cat guarding a half-sliced cheese will like it's sacred. A woman yells at someone behind a curtain. It's unclear who or why, but you assume it's personal and involves a goat. You keep walking. The ground under your feet flattens as you approach the Forum Holatorium, the old vegetable market. It's quieter now than it used to be. The grand marble temples on either side loom like retired actors. They've seen things, they've heard things, and now they mostly just provide shade and architectural gilt. To your left, a small shrine sits nestled in the wall. A tiny alcove with a soot-blackened figure of Vesta, goddess of the hearth. Someone has left her a small loaf of bread, perfectly round, neatly scored. You pause to look at it. It's a beautiful offering, but you notice something odd. The scoring is on the left side only. As if someone dared the gods to blink. You look around. No one else seems to care. Or maybe they're just pretending. Major historical fact: Vesta was among the most sacred deities in Rome. Her temple flame, tended by the Vestal virgins, was never allowed to go out. Bread baked in her honor was prepared in silence, shaped with care, and often left as offerings to ensure peace at home. The hearth, after all, was the Wi-Fi of ancient Rome. Without it, everything stopped working. You hear a voice behind you. "Don't look too long at the left-scored loaves," says a man in a faded tunic. He has a cart of broken tiles and the general energy of someone who has been cursed at least once. He introduces himself as Felix, a tile mason and part-time gossip. He offers you a date, the fruit, not the experience, and explains that he heard rumors. A baker's apprentice scorched a batch of loaves, blamed a left-handed kneading, and was promptly reassigned to sewage duty. Which, in ancient Rome, is not metaphorical. "Bread has rules," Felix says, chewing thoughtfully. "Rules and ghosts." You nod. Because what else can you do when ghosts get involved? Obscure tidbit: there was a Roman superstition that any food burned in the oven could attract Laras, the household spirits. They weren't evil, exactly, but they were temperamental. Burnt bread was seen as a sign that something was wrong with the home. Or with the baker. Or with Mercury, who frankly was always up to something. Felix hands you a tile with a thumbprint in it. "That's mine," he says. From the bathhouse floor. You thank him like this is normal. Because in this city, it is. Historians still debate whether this reverence for bread was religious, cultural, or simply practical. Bread was cheap, filling, and everywhere, it became ritual by default. You walk on, tile in one hand, loaf in the other. The light is dimming now. A soft, drowsy kind of twilight. You pass by a group of children drawing on the ground with charcoal. One of them draws a lopsided loaf with eyes. Another one laughs. You don't ask. You feel the city exhale. Even the birds seem quieter. And somewhere in the distance, a baker's oven cools. You're not quite sure how you ended up here, in the shadow of the Aventine Hill, but here you are. The slope rises like a sleepy giant beside you. Cypress trees line the path upward, tall and thin and probably judging you. You start the climb slowly. There's no rush. Rome has been here for a while. Each step feels like a breadcrumb trail back through time. The dust clings to your sandals. The silence thickens. Occasionally, a distant shout from the city below reminds you that life still continues without your input. At the top, the world feels wider. The Aventine overlooks the Tiber River, lazily twisting like a misplaced ribbon. Below, rooftops blush in the fading sunlight. Somewhere, smoke drifts upward in a patient spiral, someone's dinner, someone's story. And just to your right, tucked against a crumbling brick wall, is a small garden. Wild rosemary. A few vines. An olive tree that has definitely seen more emperors than you have. Sitting there, half in shadow, is a woman with silver-streaked hair and a face shaped by stories. Her name is Tulia, and she is a retired priestess of Ceres, the goddess of grain. She gestures for you to sit. You do, carefully, as if not to disturb the herbs. Tulia speaks in a low voice, the kind people use when they've told the same story many times, but still enjoy the telling. She tells you that in her temple days, they used to sort grain by hand, removing any that seemed misshapen, or, worse, spiraling counterclockwise. That meant the grain had been touched by misdirection. Not evil, just sideways. Major historical fact, the cult of Ceres was responsible for agricultural festivals like Cerealia, which involved parades, games, and even foxes with torches tied to their tails. Yes, really. These celebrations honor the cycle of growth and warned against interfering with the natural order, especially with bread. Tulia explains that on feast days, loaves had to be braided in 3 strands. If a 4th strand appeared, some said accidentally, others claimed by divine prank, it was to be buried. Not eaten. Not sold. Just quietly returned to the earth, like an embarrassing memory. You ask if she believes it. She smiles. Does it matter? The gods watched everything. Especially the bread. Obscure tidbit, some Roman bakers would whisper to their dough as it rose, offering compliments. Not because the dough needed flattery, but because silence made space for omens. A puff too soon? A sign. A crack on the wrong side? A warning. The bread listened. Supposedly. Historians still debate whether the ritualized treatment of baking was mostly superstition or a deeply practical method of quality control disguised as faith. Probably both. Tulia stands and hands you a small cloth pouch. Inside are 3 dried grains of emmer wheat, polished smooth with age. She tells you to keep them. For balance. You thank her. You mean it. The wind picks up slightly, moving through the olive branches like a sigh. Far below, Rome continues to blink its lanterns on, one by one. You sit there for a long time, your hands full of ancient grain and superstition, watching the city remember its rituals. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, night arrives. You descend the Aventine slowly, the slope a little steeper now that the light has dipped behind the rooftops. There's a faint lavender hue to the sky, the kind that makes you feel like time is softening around the edges. You walk with the quiet confidence of someone carrying sacred wheat and absolutely no plan for dinner. A cat darts across the path in front of you. You pause. It looks slightly left-footed. You choose not to think about it. The streets are calmer now. Lamps flicker on doorsteps, lit with oil that smells faintly of walnuts and warm gossip. You pass a man with a tray of baked figs, and he offers you one without speaking. You nod and take it. It tastes like honey had a conversation with ash and decided they could be friends. You find yourself near the Templum Pacis, the Temple of Peace. A grand name for a space that now mostly echoes with the feet of quiet guards and pigeons pretending to be religious. The marble columns rise in tired elegance, streaked with soot and time. You sit on the edge of a dry fountain. There's a carved dolphin in the center that has definitely seen better days. A pair of older men argue nearby, with the slow rhythm of people who have had this argument weekly since the year of the last eclipse. Something about grain prices, or goats, or both. Major historical fact: the Roman grain supply was such a delicate system that the emperors often declared emergency distributions, congiaria, to calm unrest. Sometimes free grain, sometimes olive oil or wine. Bread, in the political sense, was as useful as speeches. Arguably more. You nibble the fig and listen. One of the men says that bread prices have been cursed since someone's cousin insulted Ceres by slicing a loaf before it had cooled. The other scoffs, but also makes a small warning gesture with his fingers. You look down at the dolphin. Even it seems tired of the drama. Obscure tidbit: it was common in certain Roman bakeries to sell loaves with specific notches indicating freshness. 1 notch meant fresh. 2 meant day old. 3? You're on your own. But if the notches ran in a spiral, leftward, they were sometimes left on the shelf. Bread, after all, was a good omen only when it knew which way to spin. A boy runs past you barefoot, clutching a bundle of herbs and a stolen figure. He's fast. The argument pauses just long enough for a shared glance, and then resumes as if nothing happened. You stretch your legs, stand, and begin walking again, past shuttered shops and open windows where the smell of chickpea stew drifts lazily toward the stars. Historians still debate whether these daily beliefs about bread and its preparation were more powerful than formal rituals. But in a world lit by oil and soot, sometimes it's the superstition that keeps the peace. You take a turn down an alley you don't remember entering. It's quiet here, except for the clinking of dishes and the faint strum of a cithara in the distance. A lullaby for the neighborhood. The stones underfoot feel warm still. Rome sighs around you, and your left hand itches slightly, but it's probably nothing. You wake up. No, not from sleep, just from a daze. The kind you fall into when the world slows and the city hums like an old wine jar. You're now near the Transtiberum district, across the river. Not quite downtown, not quite countryside. Somewhere in between. The kind of place where people say it's quieter here and then immediately start yelling at each other over stew. A small footbridge carries you across the Tiber, its water gleaming like melted slate beneath the moonlight. The breeze here carries a hint of garlic, wood smoke, and river fish. You walk slowly, the city now a whisper behind you, and ahead, another kind of Rome. This side is full of workshops. Potters, tanners, musicians, one man who appears to just shout poetry at chickens. You admire the commitment. You're headed to a popina, a tavern. Not the kind with senators. The kind with stools made from wine crates and a menu that's mostly theoretical. Inside, the fire crackles lazily. A few locals sit hunched over bowls, murmuring in half-words. A woman stirs something in a pot that smells like lentils, vinegar, and hope. You sit, and she nods. She gives you stew. And bread. The bread is strange. You turn it over in your hands. It's flat, folded like a letter, and scored in a swirl. Leftward. She watches your face. It's panis perditus, she says. Lost bread. Major historical fact: Romans often repurposed unsold or stale bread into new dishes, like pulse, a grain-based porridge, or by soaking and reheating loaves in oil and herbs. Bread was never wasted. Panis perditus, literally lost bread, was a term used for bread that had been improperly baked, scorched, or shaped wrong. You take a bite. It's chewy, earthy, surprisingly good. The woman, her name is Julia, explains that this kind of bread is made at night, with leftover dough and no stamps. It's not legal for sale, but it's good enough for the back tables. She smiles faintly. Bread doesn't need to be perfect to feed you. Obscure tidbit: some Roman bakers believed dough that rose too fast had been interfered with by restless spirits. Fast rising meant instability. A sign to poke it back down, sometimes with ritual chants, sometimes with 2 fingers and a muttered complaint. You look around. On the wall hangs a dried wreath made of grain, garlic, and a scrap of linen. Julia says it's for the manes, the spirits of the dead. They like to be remembered with flour. You nod as if you completely understand that sentence. Historians still debate whether these nighttime baking rituals were widespread or localized, leftovers of older Etruscan traditions blending with Roman practicality. But they persist in records, in shadows, in crusts no one officially baked. You finish the stew. You finish the bread. You don't ask for more. Julia waves you out with a warm look and a wink that suggests you now know too much about bread and should probably lie low. You step back into the cool night. The river glimmers. The bridge waits. The wind nudges you gently, as if to say, "Go on, dreamer." The loaf is only the beginning. You cross the river again, slower this time, your steps marked by the soft clack of sandal on stone. The Tiber slides beneath you like a secret, whispering something that's probably none of your business. The city ahead is quieter now, tucked in, mostly, but some doorways still glow, and voices drift like steam from half-latched shutters. You take the long way around the Capitoline Hill, not because it's necessary, but because it feels like the kind of night where corners matter. You pass a statue missing an arm. It gestures with its absence. You nod politely. You find yourself near a Horia, Rome's public granaries. Tall, windowless brick buildings with thick walls and a temperament like your uncle who collects ancient coins and does that like company. The guards here are half awake but sharp-eyed. Grain, after all, is not just food, it's control. The air is cool here, tinged with dust and the faint musk of stored abundance. Inside, the grain is stacked in amphorae and silos, sorted by type, origin, and sometimes, mood. A clerk named Marcellus meets you at the door. He is precise. He carries a wax tablet, a stylus, and a barely concealed disdain for anyone who asks about bread without a requisition form. He allows you inside because, frankly, you look tired and no one else has asked today. As you walk the cool corridors between sacks and jars, Marcellus speaks. Grain comes from everywhere: Egypt, Sicily, Gaul. But bread? Bread is local. Bread is personal. He leads you to a row of labeled amphorae. Some bear wax seals, others are marked with a tiny S, a symbol for sacrificium. Major historical fact: some Roman granaries stored grain reserved not for people, but for the gods. These special reserves were marked and protected, and used in temples for rituals, sacrifices, and festivals. You didn't touch divine grain casually. Even thinking about it too hard made certain priests nervous. You glance at one amphora and notice its seal has a little swirl, not a spiral, not exactly, but enough to remind you of the bakery earlier. Leftward. Marcellus notices. He leans in. That shipment caused mildew. Twice. He says this like a curse. Obscure tidbit: Roman grain inspectors were notoriously superstitious. Some refused to accept shipments that had even minor irregularities in the grain shape or smell. If a sack smelled too sweet, it was considered suspect. If it clumped at the bottom, possibly bewitched. They preferred their grain boring and emotionally neutral. You thank Marcellus and promise to remember the proper forms for future requests. He does not smile, but he nods like a man who appreciates bureaucracy. As you step out into the night, the stars have gathered overhead. Rome, for all her fires and markets, still has room for starlight. Historians still debate whether the grain rituals were purely symbolic or genuinely believed to affect divine favor. Either way, nobody risked left-leaning flour near the gods. You walk away from the granary and back toward the city's heartbeat, that low, eternal thrum of sandals, water, sleep, and myth. Somewhere nearby, someone is singing about onions again. You let the sound lead you. The voice leads you to the edge of the Esquiline Hill, where gardens bloom despite the dust and where tombs whisper stories from beneath their mossy stones. It's an odd part of the city, half park, half cemetery, half dreamscape. The math doesn't work, but the vibe is perfect. You wander through the garden paths, past fig trees and half-forgotten shrines. A fox stares at you from beneath a laurel bush. It doesn't blink. You nod. It nods back. You keep moving. At the far end of the gardens is a domed house made of faded brick and ivy. A lantern glows behind its window like a tired eye. You knock once. Twice. Then the door opens without sound. Inside is a woman named Fausta. She is older than bread, by her own admission, and has the posture of someone who knows the weight of dough and the weight of secrets. She invites you in with a motion of her wrist. You sit on a stool that wobbles slightly but loyally. Fausta brews you something, herb tea, maybe, or a potion against skepticism. It tastes like chamomile and mild defiance. She asks if you've heard of bread divination. You shake your head, which is all the invitation she needs. Loaves speak, she says. To those who listen. If you score a crust just right, you can ask it questions. She pulls out a flat loaf, baked with a swirl, and breaks it in half. The inside has bubbles, pockets of air that she reads like others read birds or dreams. Major historical fact, while not as formalized as Roman augury. Certain rural practices involved interpreting food, bread included, for signs and omens. The way it rose, the way it cracked, even where it burned could be taken as symbolic. Some early Christians later adopted similar practices, especially with communion loaves. Fausta points to a split bubble near the center. That, she says, is travel. Possibly uphill. You are already on a hill. This feels relevant. She tells you that bakers used to offer divination on the side. For a small fee, you could bring your bread and ask, Is this marriage blessed? Will the harvest hold? Should I lend my neighbor a donkey? Sometimes the bread said yes. Sometimes it burned. Obscure tidbit: in parts of rural Latium, it was believed that if a loaf cracked too loudly when sliced, it meant a storm was coming, not of weather, but of arguments. Families delayed important conversations if the crust snapped just so. Bread, the original relationship counselor. You sip the rest of your tea and ask Fausta if she believes in the omens. She shrugs. Belief is what holds the yeast up. Historians still debate whether any of this was more than cozy folklore, but many early Roman writers mention kitchen signs and crust readings as everyday parts of rustic life. No scrolls, just scorch marks and guesswork. Fausta gives you the loaf. Says it will keep you safe. You thank her, your hands now full of tea warmth, baked prophecy, and the faint scent of fennel. Outside, the night deepens. The air is cooler now, and the stars look smug about it. You head downhill, through the hush of sleeping ivy, carrying a loaf that might know your future. Let's hope it's right-handed. You're walking again, but slower now, as if the weight of prophecy and carbohydrates is beginning to press into your bones. The loaf from Fausta is tucked under your arm. It feels oddly warm. You're not sure if that's mystical or just leftover oven heat, but you decide not to question it. Rome is quieter this late. Even the dogs have given up on barking and are just repositioning themselves for better dreams. You pass one curled against a column, sighing in that deep, philosophical way only dogs and very tired philosophers can manage. The moon hangs over the city like a gossiping ant, bright, round, and a little too involved. You drift past the Templum Saturni in the Forum Romanum. It stands like a skeletal giant, its columns catching the moonlight in vertical silver streaks. You remember someone once told you Saturn was associated with time, discipline, and, yes, grain. Everything is always about grain. You sit on a stone bench that is almost certainly older than several religions. The marble is cool beneath you. You unwrap the loaf from Fausta and study it again. It looks innocent. But you know better now. A young man in a worn tunic sits nearby. You didn't hear him arrive. He introduces himself as Naso, which means nose. You decide not to ask. He's a former priest's assistant, now a musician. He carries a tibia, a reed instrument, and the weary joy of someone who used to take omens seriously and now takes naps instead. You offer him a piece of bread. He declines. I don't eat anything with swirls after sundown. You nod. That seems fair. Major historical fact: the Temple of Saturn housed Rome's public treasury and was the symbolic guardian of agriculture and wealth. During Saturnalia, the roles of master and servant were reversed, and bread was baked into strange shapes, sometimes left-handed swirls, to mark the turning of the world. It was one of the few days those breads were seen as lucky. Naso says he once played during a Saturnalia feast and watched a senator cry because his loaf fell crust down. That's a bad year, he says. You don't want a crust down year. He plays a few soft notes on his tibia. The sound is hollow, wandering, like wind through olive trees. Obscure tidbit: some Romans believed that music could flatter dough as it rose. Certain melodies were thought to ease fermentation. Bakers with good singing voices were prized. Bakers with bad ones were told to hum very, very softly. You ask Naso if he still believes in signs. He shrugs. Belief is a kind of music. You don't have to understand the lyrics. Historians still debate whether Saturnalia's lucky loaf rituals were standardized across Rome or more improvised depending on the temple. Evidence exists in scattered graffiti, a few letters, and a deeply confusing poem involving a goat and a broken bread stamp. You thank Naso and leave him to his music and memories. As you walk on, the Forum stretches out behind you, columns lit by moonlight, temples slumbering with the patience of marble. Your feet find the path again. Your bread stays silent. At least, for now. You're drifting now, more than walking. The city has softened, its harsh corners melted into moonlight and candle glow. It's the kind of hour when shadows stretch out just to rest their elbows. You find yourself in the Velabrum, the low-lying market area nestled between hills. By day, it's chaos, carts, donkeys, shouting, onions. But by night, it's a whispering square full of echoes and dreams half-packed for tomorrow. You pass a shrine to Mercury, god of travel, trickery, and misdelivered loaves. Someone has left him an offering, a tiny pastry shaped like a purse. You consider whether it's symbolic or just leftover. A man waves you over. He's leaning against a cart with one wheel missing, chewing on a twig and wearing the expression of a man who once knew what time it was but no longer cares. He says his name is Publius, but everyone calls him Lefty. You try not to react. He chuckles. Yes, the irony. Left-handed baker. Still here. No lightning yet. You glance at the cart behind him, it's stacked with odd-looking loaves. Triangular, cracked, and, are those tiny symbols pressed into the crust? You ask. He shrugs. Cursed bread. Decorative only. Major historical fact, in certain fringe Roman cults, particularly those with mystery rites, bread was used as a symbolic tool. Shapes mattered. A triangle for balance. A spiral for transition. A cracked top for release. These loaves weren't for eating, they were for rituals, offerings, or sometimes burial. Publius offers you one. Don't worry, this one's expired. Harmless now. You hold it. It feels like a secret with yeast. He tells you that people feared left-handed bread not because it tasted different, but because it defied expectation. In a world where everything had a right and proper way, the left was too loose, too wild, too possible. Obscure tidbit: some Roman bakers intentionally trained apprentices to mix dough with both hands, not for skill, but so the bread wouldn't know which side was dominant. It was believed this confused malevolent spirits. Whether it worked is debatable. You ask Publius if he believes in any of it. He smiles. Doesn't matter what I believe. The customers believe. That's enough. Historians still debate whether bread rituals in the Velabrum were mainstream or simply tolerated local weirdness. Roman law didn't regulate beliefs, just taxes. And you couldn't tax superstition. Publius wishes you well. He tells you to bury that expired loaf in a garden. Good for fertility. Or forgetfulness. I can't remember which. You carry it anyway. As you walk away, the Velabrum fades behind you, its shadows reshaping, its stories curling like steam from a cooling hearth. 2 loaves now. two hands. You think, just for a moment, about which one is left, and which one is right, and which one is watching you. You turn toward the Via Sacra, the sacred way, Rome's ceremonial spine. By day, it's full of processions, politicians, and pickpockets. By night, it's eerily still, just you, the polished stones, and the quiet smugness of a street that's carried triumphs and tragedies alike. The paving stones shine under moonlight, slightly damp from the evening air. Your sandals make soft taps that echo too well. You imagine that every step sounds like a question. 2 loaves, 2 hands. You don't know which one's safe anymore. As you walk, you pass archways, those celebratory sculptures of victory that stand like dramatic Instagram filters. The Arch of Titus looms ahead, etched with a parade of soldiers and sacred spoils. You stare at the marble relief of a man carrying a menorah on his shoulder like it's a particularly heavy wine rack. A voice speaks from behind you. Funny thing about bread and conquest, the voice says. You turn. A man with a lantern and a dusty cloak stands beside a cart full of scrolls. He introduces himself as Sextus, a scribe for the city archives. Not important enough for a toga. Just important enough to know things he shouldn't. He says that after major Roman victories, bakeries were often ordered to create commemorative loaves, strange shapes, symbolic crusts, even ingredients from conquered lands. Flavored with the taste of victory, he says, rolling his eyes. You ask if that meant anything. He nods. It meant we had to eat garlic-laced Egyptian barley bread for a month. That's a punishment, not a celebration. Major historical fact, Roman generals did indeed commemorate victories with public festivals, including large-scale bread distributions. In some cases, the loaves were symbolic, etched with images of foreign lands or spices from new provinces. Rome was nothing if not theatrical. You show him your 2 loaves. He leans in and studies them like a scholar peering into a mystery cult. This one's been scored too shallow, he murmurs, tapping the swirl. Could mean forgetfulness. Or a baker with weak wrists. He looks at the other, the triangle loaf from Publius. This one's for boundaries. Symbolic separation. Divorce bread, we used to call it. You blink. People really bait for breakups? He nods. Everything had a loaf. Weddings, funerals, promotions, plagues. There was even a bread for retiring public officials. Very dry. Obscure tidbit, plague bread was a real concept, baked with bitter herbs and offered to the Laras, house spirits, during epidemics. The idea was to confuse death with unpleasant flavor. It didn't work, but the tradition lingered like burnt crust. Sextus tells you one last thing. There was a bakery once that made only mirror loaves, scored backwards, wrapped backwards, even stacked on the shelf with the crust facing inward. It didn't last. Customers said the bread looked like it was thinking too much. Historians still debate whether symbolic breads were truly believed to hold meaning or simply acted as edible metaphors. Either way, they shaped how people felt about flour and about each other. Sextus wishes you luck. Whichever hand you favor, make sure it doesn't favor you back. You thank him, your scroll of superstition growing longer by the loaf. The sacred way continues beneath your feet. The stones shine. Your breath fogs slightly in the air. You walk on. The stars have begun to shift. You don't know how long you've been walking, only that the city has changed around you, just enough to feel like dreaming. You are now near the Campus Martius, once a field for military training, now a city within the city. Temples, theaters, baths, and the occasional goat. It's a place that buzzes even when silent. The marble of the Theater of Pompey looms like a broken shell. Its steps are littered with olive pits and dry leaves. You sit, because your feet request it. Beside you, a man in a toga stares at the moon. His name is Lupus, and he smells faintly of incense and legal disappointment. You ask if he's waiting for something. He sighs. A verdict. The gods are late. You nod. You've had those days. He notices your loaves. Left-handed bread? He asks, with the tone of a lawyer asking if you've recently committed light arson. You shrug. Maybe. He tells you about augury law, how the interpretation of signs, including food omens, once held legal weight. If a magistrate received a bad omen before a ruling, the case could be delayed. If a priest sneezed during sentencing, trial paused. But if someone dropped bread and it cracked leftward, he pauses. Well, that could mean divine objection. Or indigestion. It depended on the bribe. Major historical fact: augurs were official Roman religious figures who interpreted signs from the gods. Their readings could delay political votes, military decisions, and legal proceedings. While mostly associated with birds, they also included signs from household mishaps, especially food accidents. You ask if Lupus ever used bread to delay a trial. He smiles faintly. Once. I dropped a loaf. It landed crust first, rolled left, and hit the judge. We adjourned for lunch. Obscure tidbit: there were recorded incidents where bread accidents, such as a falling loaf, an oven cracking, or a servant slicing before sunrise, were submitted as official reasons to delay civic duty. Rome, where carbs carried consequences. Lupus stands to leave, but not before offering you one piece of advice. Don't trust loaves with symmetrical swirls. That's when the gods can't make up their minds. Historians still debate whether this legal superstition was truly believed or a convenient excuse for strategic stalling. Either way, the judges went along with it, probably because they were hungry. You remain on the steps, staring at your loaves. One cracked. One swirled. One possibly whispering. You're not sure what verdict you're waiting for. But something tells you the next bite matters. And so you rise. And keep walking. You walk with a different pace now, not faster, not slower, just deliberate. Like someone who has stared into the crust of fate and seen a few too many bubbles. Your path leads you into the Palatine Hill Gardens, where the air is sweeter and the buildings are fewer. Olive trees arch above the path like sleepy guards. Somewhere in the darkness, a night bird calls out with impressive emotional commitment. You settle on a stone bench near what was once an imperial terrace. It overlooks the city, glittering faintly in pools of oil light and moon silver. Below you, Rome stirs in its sleep. You unwrap one of your loaves, the triangle-shaped one from Publius, and study its surface again. The crust is cracked, not by accident but by intention. Decorative fault lines. You wonder if they're still symbolic. You wonder if you've started to believe any of this. Someone clears their throat nearby. It's an elderly woman carrying a lantern and a small basket of herbs. She introduces herself as Octavia, a retired midwife and part-time healer. Her hands are dusted with flour, still warm from baking. She sits beside you and says, "You're carrying too many loaves for one soul." You agree, which is all the invitation she needs. Octavia tells you about birthing bread, a tradition in older Roman homes, where women in labor were given a special loaf to grip during delivery. It was braided, warmed, and often shaped like a spiral or a knot. Afterward, the crust would be broken and scattered for the Lares, as thanks. Major historical fact: Roman domestic rituals around childbirth included offerings of bread, oil, and small tokens. Some loaves were made with honey and fig, not to eat, but to appease household spirits and ensure protection during difficult births. Midwives sometimes carried their own private bread blessings for each home. You ask if Octavia still bakes those loaves. She smiles. Only for luck now. Or insomnia. She pulls a tiny roll from her basket and hands it to you. It's soft, twisted like a sleepy cat, and dusted with fennel. You bite into it. It tastes like warmth and something older than stories. Obscure tidbit: in some parts of rural Italy, remnants of birthing bread customs lingered well into the medieval period. Superstition claimed that the knot in the loaf tied the pain of childbirth to the dough, so when the loaf was broken, the pain would ease. In practice, it likely just offered comfort. Hot carbs do that. Octavia leans back and tells you this. Bread remembers everything, even the hands that shape it. You believe her. Historians still debate whether midwives' rituals with bread were standardized practice or personal tradition passed down through apprenticeships. Records are scarce. Most knowledge lived in hands, not scrolls. You thank Octavia. She tells you to sleep soon, or the loaves might start asking questions. As she walks off down the olive path, her lantern swinging like a soft heartbeat, you feel the warmth of her bread linger in your chest. The stars above Palatine Hill blink slowly, as if trying to stay awake just a little longer. You're not far behind them. You drift downward again, off the Palatine and back into the folds of the sleeping city. Every street feels familiar now, like folds in a well-worn cloak. You pass streets you've seen before, but they look gentler in the moonlight. Less suspicious. More philosophical. The air carries hints of lavender and ash. Somewhere, someone is sweeping. Somewhere else, a donkey sighs in its sleep. You pass a small, worn building with smoke still curling from its chimney. There's a symbol above the door, 2 sheaves of wheat crossed beneath a crescent moon. The bakery is closed, but not asleep. You knock. A man opens the door a crack. His eyes are half-lidded, but curious. His name is Vero, and he is a nocturnus pister, a night baker. One of the few licensed to use the ovens after dark. You tell him you're walking with loaves. He opens the door the rest of the way. Inside, the warmth is immediate. The oven glows orange-red in the corner, crackling softly. On a wooden table, there are rows of dough, rising slowly, deliberately. The room smells like thyme and ash and the beginning of something. Vero gestures for you to sit. He pours a cup of barley water and offers you a piece of unbaked dough. You can hold it, he says. Feel the rise. You do. It's cool, soft, pulsing slightly as if breathing. He speaks as he needs. You know what scares me more than left-handed bread? He asks. You shake your head. Bread that doesn't rise at all means the East has no faith. That's the worst kind of omen. Major historical fact: Roman night bakers were essential to the city's function. They began their work when others went to sleep, ensuring bread was ready for the morning crowd. Night baking was both practical and semi-sacred. Some believed that baking in the hours of silence gave the bread spiritual strength. Vero shows you his bread ledger. Small marks next to each batch. Some have spirals. Some have XS. You ask what they mean. Dreams, he replies. I write them down. Sometimes the dough absorbs them. You think he's joking. You also think he's not. Obscure tidbit: it was believed by some that dreams dreamt near rising dough could imprint energy into it. Some night bakers would place bowls of water or salt under their beds to protect the flour from nightmares. You hand Vero one of your loaves, the triangle one, the cracked crust. He studies it, nods. Grief bread, he says. Meant to be eaten alone. Best with lentils. Or silence. Historians still debate whether these classifications were codified or just personal mythologies passed between generations of bakers. But carvings of mourning loaves have been found in tomb reliefs, bread shaped to carry feeling. Vero places the loaf gently on a side shelf. He says he'll keep it warm, just in case it's listening. You finish your barley water, thank him softly, and step back out into the Roman night. There's only one loaf in your hands now. The one from Fausta. Still warm. Still mysterious. You walk, softer than before. Even the city seems to be stepping carefully now. As if bread dreams linger longer than we expect. You walk the last stretch through Regio 8, near the edge of the Forum Boreum, the old cattle market, long quiet now, save for the occasional soft low of a half-remembered ox in your imagination. Statues lean like tired witnesses. Columns glow faintly under starlight. Even the dust here seems slower. You move with the steady pace of someone carrying a story. You've been gathering fragments all night, superstitions, shapes, scents, and bread with more personality than some emperors. You hold your final loaf like a sleeping cat, warm, self-contained, and likely judging you. Ahead, tucked in a small alley beneath a vine-covered arch, is a forgotten shrine to Panis Primigenius, the first loaf. Few remember him now. He's not exactly a god. More like a spirit. The whisper before the oven door opens. The idea of bread, rather than the loaf itself. The shrine is barely more than a niche with a carved stone depicting a plump, smiling figure with a crusty halo. Someone has left tiny offerings, a lump of dough, a broken crust, a dried fig with a bite taken out. You stand before it and unwrap the last loaf, Fausta's spiral. You hesitate. Then place it gently at the shrine's base. No thunder. No wind. Just the soft creak of the city continuing. You breathe out slowly. A child's voice behind you says, "You fed him." You turn to see a girl sitting on a step, wrapped in a blanket and lit by moonlight. She holds a crust between her fingers, nibbles slowly, and smiles without showing teeth. "Bread doesn't care what hand you use," she says, "as long as you don't waste it." You nod. You've been walking all night for that sentence. Major historical fact: some minor Roman cults revered anthropomorphized spirits of food preparation, kneading, rising, baking, as domestic divinities. Though not formally worshipped in temples, these bread spirits received quiet offerings in kitchens and roadside shrines. More kindness than religion. You ask the girl if she's waiting for someone. She shakes her head. Just watching who leaves bread. She stands, pats the step, and says, "This city is made of flour. All stories are crumbs." Obscure tidbit: there was a children's rhyme in 1st century Rome: flour for morning, ash for night / bake with care or taste the fright. It was recited before baking festivals were offered as a warning for mischievous apprentices. Historians still debate whether this rhyme was part of formal tradition or just a spooky way to keep kids from poking hot ovens. The girl vanishes between the walls like steam. You sit alone for a moment longer. Rome stretches before you, not ancient, not modern, just resting. The bakery fires are out. The gods are quiet. Even the moon has softened into a milky blur. You lean back against the shrine wall, eyes half closed. The cracked loaf, the swirl, the wedge of prophecy, it's all behind you now. You've walked every superstition. You've met every baker. You've tasted fear, flour, and fennel. And now you breathe in. One last time. The smell of stone and wheat. Of olive wood smoke. Of history still rising. The night exhales with you. You wake before the sun. Or maybe you never slept. It's hard to say in a city where even silence hums. Rome is still wrapped in her softest shadows. The kind that cling to arches and hover under balconies, as if reluctant to let the light return. The air smells faintly of wet stone, old smoke, and something sweet, perhaps the last embers of an overbaked fig tart, or memory. You stand from your perch at the shrine and stretch quietly, careful not to disturb the crumbs left as offerings. The spiral loaf you placed is gone. Whether eaten, claimed, or simply accepted, you'll never know. You begin walking, not out of duty or destination, but because it feels right to move. As you drift through the dawn-laced streets, you pass a wall covered in ancient graffiti. The familiar kind. Not declarations of war or poetry, but bread prices. A baker's ad. A drawing of a round loaf with angry eyes. Rome's earliest Yelp reviews. A dog trots beside you briefly, then veers off without explanation. You respect its boundaries. You arrive at a quiet courtyard where a small crowd is gathered. Not large. Just enough to make you wonder what you missed. In the center stands a man with a scroll. His robes are creased, his sandals tired. He speaks softly but with precision, as though each word is weighed against a basket of wheat. He is reading aloud the daily grain allotment from the Praefectus Annoni, the official in charge of the food supply. Major historical fact: the Roman government operated a complex and critical grain distribution system known as the Annona. Eligible citizens, especially the urban poor, were entitled to monthly rations of grain, often processed into bread by local bakers. It was one of the earliest examples of state-subsidized food welfare. The man finishes the scroll, announces the weight of flour for the week, then unceremoniously folds the parchment and vanishes into the morning light. The crowd murmurs, some pleased, some bored. One woman mutters that the last time she trusted that weight, her dough deflated like a disappointed senator. You pass her by. She hands you a piece of bread. Too light, but still warm. You nod your thanks and move on, the loaf warm in your hand, soft at the edges, like a thaw barely formed. Obscure tidbit: it was rumored that during shortages, bakers would bake airier loaves, fluffing dough with milk or mashed beans, to stretch the grain further. Some called it clever. Others called it betrayal. Most just called it lunch. You find a fountain and sit again. The water trickles like sleepy applause. You break the loaf. It falls unevenly, the left side heavier. You smile. Historians still debate whether the Annona truly kept Rome fed or merely kept rebellion postponed. But bread and politics, then as now, were never far apart. You eat slowly. Each bite is light, mildly sour, just enough salt to keep you grounded. The sky begins to turn pink. And your journey, which began with suspicion, superstition, and spiral loaves, feels like it's been folded into something softer. Rome stretches her arms. And you, a witness of wandering in warm crumbs, close your eyes just for a moment more. The sun lifts itself above the skyline, and with it comes the sounds of real life, mules braying, shutters swinging open, someone swearing at a rooster who clearly missed his curfew. You're still sitting by the fountain, but now you're not alone. A child plays nearby with a wax tablet, carving shapes that may or may not be letters. Two pigeons argue over a crumb beside your foot, as if they, too, understand the value of stale blessings. You rise slowly and walk toward a familiar scent, fresh dough. Yes, again. This time, it leads you to the open back door of a thermopolium, a Roman street food stall. You peek inside. The woman behind the counter is named Claudia, and she is making libum, a soft, sweet sacrificial bread often offered to household gods. Today, she's baking a few extra. Because some gods are greedy, she says with a wink. She offers you one warm from the pan. It's golden, round, and smells like honey in quiet mornings. You sit at a wooden bench while she pours watered wine. It tastes faintly of raisins and opinions. Major historical fact: libum was a simple cheese-based bread, used in Roman sacrifices to the Penates, the household deities of the pantry and hearth. Though sacred in ritual, it was also a comfort food, made for both prayer and pleasure. Claudia asks if you've heard the story of the man who ate left-offered libum and dreamed of purple cows for a week. You have not. You pretend this is surprising. She says superstitions around bread aren't about truth. They're about timing, she says. And who's watching when you break the crust? You sip your wine, nodding like someone who now absolutely believes bread is watching. Obscure tidbit: there was once a traveling oracle who claimed to divine fortunes by pressing her face into a freshly baked libum and interpreting the imprint. She was banned from several bakeries for steaming up the loaves. You finish your breakfast slowly. A bite. A pause. A longer bite. You thank Claudia. She hands you a second libum, wrapped in cloth. for your hearth, she says. Even if it's imaginary. Historians still debate whether Libum was originally Etruscan or early Roman, but either way, its survival is proof of what matters most: flour, fire, and faith. You leave the Thermopolium, sun-warmed and full. Rome is fully awake now. But you're coasting, like a loaf mid-rise. Peaceful. Expanding slightly. Preparing for dreams yet to be baked. You walk slower now, not because you're tired, though you are, but because the city is speeding up. Wagons rumble past. Children chase figs. Someone sneezes 3 times in a row, and a nearby vendor refuses to touch his bread for the next 10 minutes. You're in Regio V, the heart of daily trade. Everywhere you look, there's movement. Baskets, cloaks, hands, voices, smoke. The scent of charcoal roasted chickpeas follows you like a friendly ghost. And yet, you find a quiet street. One that curves gently behind a fishmonger's stall, slips past an abandoned marble bathhouse, and ends at a modest insula, an apartment building with sun-bleached balconies and laundry strung between them like flags of surrender. On the first floor, you spot a sign scratched into the plaster: Panis Fortunatus, fortunate bread. The door is open. Inside is a kitchen, small and square. The walls are stained with soot and devotion. Hanging from one hook is a clay amulet in the shape of a loaf. A woman hums as she grinds flour with a hand mill. She has flour in her hair and confidence in her elbow. Her name is Marina. And she doesn't glance up as you enter. You're here for the lucky crust, she says. You are now. She motions to the table where 4 loaves rest, identical except for the scoring. One has a single dot. One has a spiral. One has a line. One has nothing. You point. None, you ask. She smiles. Sometimes the gods don't want to be told what to think. Major historical fact: in Roman private homes, it was common to shape loaves for meaning: one dot for a safe journey, a swirl for change, a cross for health. Unmarked loaves were rare, often seen as neutral offerings, neither asking nor promising anything. You watch her slice one open. The steam lifts like an incantation. She offers you the piece with the swirl. You break it in half. And the inner crumb is marbled with tiny air pockets. Marina peers inside like a priest reading tea leaves. Fortune today, she says. But in lowercase. You ask if she truly believes in bread signs. Marina grins. I believe in what keeps people gentle. Obscure tidbit: Roman bakers sometimes delivered loaves with wax seals for privacy, used during romantic messages or prayer offerings. Peeling off the seal before breaking the loaf was both a literal and spiritual unveiling. You leave Marina's kitchen with half a warm swirl loaf in your hands and the distinct feeling that you've just met someone who could outbake destiny. Historians still debate whether lucky loaves had standardized meanings or were entirely personal symbology. What's clear is that people cared enough to keep baking their feelings. You walk again. This time, the bread in your hand feels less symbolic and more like a friend you can bite. The sun is climbing now, golden and unforgiving, but the alleys still offer coolness in patches. You find a shaded courtyard full of broken columns and potted basil plants. It smells like sunlight and patience. You sit on the rim of a dry fountain and take a moment. The swirl loaf from Marina sits on your lap. You tear off a corner and eat it slowly, eyes half closed. It tastes like someone whispered comfort into dough and left it on the windowsill. A man appears beside you without sound. He's wearing a clean tunic and the distant expression of someone who just solved a complicated math problem and now regrets knowing the answer. His name is Cashin, and he's a panetarius, a formal bread steward in a senatorial household. I weigh flour for people who yell at figs, he says. It's fine. He sits beside you and stares at your loaf like it once insulted his lineage. You've got a swirl, he mutters. Dangerously hopeful. You offer him a piece. He declines. Cashin tells you that in the wealthiest homes, bread is baked by servants, but chosen by him. Symbolism is everything, he says. You can't serve a cracked crust on a feast day. It's like wearing sandals to a funeral. Major historical fact: wealthy Roman households employed specialized staff for nearly everything, including bread. The panetarius was responsible for selecting, presenting, and sometimes even interpreting baked goods during meals. Certain loaves denoted status, intention, or religious alignment. Cashin pulls out a small wooden stamp from his satchel. It's carved with the initials A.S. and a tiny fox's head. Antonia Severina, he says. Won't eat anything unless this stamp is on the loaf. Claims it keeps her enemies from dreaming about her. You nod slowly. That seems reasonable. Obscure tidbit: some elite Romans believed that dreams could be transmitted through shared food. To prevent this, they had exclusive stamps for bread, wine, and even olive oil, designed to spiritually lock the contents. Cashin sighs and stands. You're lucky. You don't serve bread. You just walk with it. You look down at your half-loaf. Lucky? Maybe. But also watched. Historians still debate whether aristocratic bread rituals were performative, spiritual, or just competitive weirdness. Likely all three. Bread was never just bread. Cashin disappears into the street, leaving you with sunlight, basil, and one fewer bite of hope-spiraled loaf. You finish what's left. There's no omen this time. Just warmth. And crumbs on your sleeve. And the quiet satisfaction of bread that asks nothing but to be eaten. By now, your steps aren't quite footsteps, they're more like floating. Not mystical, just very well carved. You've seen temples, kitchens, cracked ovens, and crossed auguries. You've met Cashin, the reluctant steward of aristocratic anxiety, and Marina, who believes in lowercase fortunes. You've placed bread on shrines. You've been warned about swirls. And yet, you still haven't exploded. Which is promising. You make your way east, into Regio 2, toward the baths of Caracalla. You're not going there for a soak. You're going for the bakery next to it, the one that serves both warm rolls and overheard secrets. The sign says simply, Panis Silens, silent bread. Inside, a man named Silvanus kneads dough with the posture of a retired gladiator and the eyes of a poet who never published. He says very little. You sit at a bench made of old wine crates. He slides you a plate. 2 small rolls. Round, smooth, unscored. You blink. He taps the bench twice and walks away. You eat. They're light, faintly sweet, and somehow private. Major historical fact: some Roman bakeries were known for quiet loaves, small, plain rolls without symbols, reserved for mourning periods, secret meetings, or certain religious rituals. They were intentionally bland, believed to be invisible to spirits and safe for introspection. A woman sitting nearby leans toward you. Her name is Livia, and she's a translator of dreams. She speaks softly, like someone who's read too many omens and is now politely tired of them. She asks if you've ever had bread that didn't say anything. You look at your plate. Nod. It's the safest kind, she says. Bread without opinions. You ask her what kind of bread she avoids. She doesn't hesitate. Anything with a backspin. You squint. Sometimes, bread rolls off the table in a spiral. Backward. That's an omen, she whispers, but no one agrees what kind. So we all just leave the room. Obscure tidbit: in at least one Roman folktale recorded near the end of the empire, a baker was said to have been cursed when a round loaf rolled backward off a table, cracked its crust, and revealed a hollow center. His entire stock turned to ash the next morning. Moral: don't let your bread escape. Livia finishes her tea, thanks Sylvanus with a nod, and vanishes into the mid-morning light. You stare at the empty plate. No prophecy. No swirl. Just absence. Historians still debate whether silent bread was a common practice or a poetic exaggeration found in satirical texts. Either way, its reputation stuck, loaves for moments too sacred or too strange to speak. You leave a coin on the counter and exit the bakery. Outside, the sun is soft, the breeze mild. The world, for once, feels undecorated. You walk on, and for the first time all day, you carry nothing at all. The street narrows, then widens. The city breathes with you now, rising and falling like dough left on a warm windowsill. You find yourself on the Clivus, a cobbled slope lined with homes that look surprised to still be standing. Ivy crawls over brick. A lizard skitters across the stones. Someone is singing off-key 3 courtyards away. At the top of the street is a quiet portico, and under its arch stands a man named Titus, whom no one seems to notice. He wears a baker's apron and an expression somewhere between dreamy and done with this. He invites you to sit. You do. He produces a scroll and unrolls it across the table. It is covered in tiny loaf diagrams. Different shapes. Markings. Curvatures. Some you recognize, some you definitely don't. He explains, this is the Codex Penarius, the bread classification system. Never published. Too many arguments. You nod as though this is perfectly normal. He points to a long, oval loaf scored with diagonal lines. Communal loaf, he says. Meant to be torn with others. If someone eats it alone, it loses flavor. Then he points to one shaped like a crescent with no crust. Moon loaf, he murmurs. You eat this if you want to forget something. You ask, what if you want to remember? He smiles. You eat nothing. Let the memory stay hungry. Major historical fact: ancient Rome had no universal standard for bread classification, but some bakers did create private systems, marking loaves with stamps, lines, or shapes to signify the customer, occasion, or intention. These bread codes rarely survived, but their traces exist in wall paintings and stone carvings. Titus says the codex was meant to make sense of the symbols. But every time he thought he had it finished, someone invented a new loaf. You ask about spiral loaves. He grows quiet. Those were never meant to be read. Just followed. Obscure tidbit. In at least one bakery ruin discovered in Pompeii, spiral symbols were carved into the kneading tables, not visible to customers. Theories suggest these were part of directional baking rituals, meant to encourage clockwise rising. Or, as some scholars propose, they were doodles. Very intense, flour-covered doodles. Titus rolls up the codex and hands you a plain roll. No code. No curse. Just lunch. You eat it slowly. It tastes like something that doesn't need to be explained. Historians still debate whether the bread codes of Rome ever formed a full system, or if they were just habits, local language, and a quiet human urge to make flour mean something. You finish the roll. You thank Titus. You continue your walk, no longer searching, but simply savoring. Ahead, the hill slopes downward into golden light. You go. The slope from the Clivus Scori brings you gently toward the Forum Romanum, now brighter than it's been all night. The stone glows gold, and the shadows have shrunk back into their corners. You walk like someone who has heard every bread myth there is and is just here for the view now. A light breeze brushes your cheek. A horse in the distance sighs audibly. You pass the Basilica Julia, where magistrates once shouted, scribes once scribbled, and now pigeons hold court with truly no sense of urgency. You pause beside a broken column where someone has etched a loaf into the marble, round, thick, with 3 scoring lines. No name. No date. Just the quiet shape of something important. A man approaches, robes rustling like parchment. His name is Crispus, and he introduces himself as a retired augur who now consults for weddings and bakery blessings. Less politics, he says, more frosting. He invites you to sit beneath the shade of a half-collapsed portico. He offers you a small biscuit. It's dry. A little chalky. You pretend to enjoy it. You've heard the stories, yes, he asks. The leftward loaves, the cursed crusts, the bakery ghosts, you nod. Most of them aren't true, he adds, then leans in. But some of them aren't false. Major historical fact, augurs, while officially associated with state rituals and interpreting the will of the gods, usually via birds, were also believed to be sensitive to omens in everyday life, like dropped bread, cracked crusts, or sourdoughs that refused to rise. These signs weren't always written down, but they lived in whispers and ritual pauses. Crispus says that bread was never just sustenance, it was continuity. A line drawn from grain to mouth, day after day. A ritual in repetition. The hands that knead, he says, are often steadier than the hands that roll. You sit with that for a moment. You ask him if he believes in the fear of left-handed bread. He laughs softly. No, he says. I fear the day people stop baking at all. Obscure tidbit, there was once a short-lived Roman sect called the Panaphyses Taciti, or silent bakers, who believed that speaking during dough preparation would anger the grain spirits. Their loaves were known for being unusually dense and eerily symmetrical. They disbanded quietly. No one missed them. Historians still debate whether the author's interest in household omens like bread was a legitimate branch of Roman divination or simply a popular adaptation of official ritual. What's clear is that for ordinary Romans, omens came not just from the sky, but from the crust. Crispus bids you farewell with a soft "May your bread never split unevenly." You walk on, the sun now full on your back, casting your shadow forward like a slightly suspicious baker's assistant. The day is late now. Shadows are long and warm instead of cold and creeping. You walk slowly through the Porticus Aemilia, a long, colonnaded warehouse once used for storing grain and goods brought upriver. Now it's half ruined, quiet, overgrown in places, but still standing. Like a retired grandmother with opinions about olive oil. You trace your fingers along the stone. It's warm. It holds stories. Inside, where once crates were stacked and scales hung, a few merchants now operate small food stalls: bread, cheese, dried fruit, wine. You approach one shaped like a half-ruined oven. A young girl with wild curls sits beside it, threading dried herbs into a garland. Her name is Janilla, and she claims to be 10, a half-oracle, and fully in charge of the rosemary. She offers you a roll without asking. It's shaped like a flower, pinched at the center. You hesitate. Is it safe? She squints at you. Depends how loud you chew. You take a cautious bite. It's flaky, savory, and somehow floral. Janilla beams. That's Panis coronatus, she says. Crown bread. You eat it when you feel lost. Not to find your way, but to enjoy being lost. Major historical fact: certain ceremonial breads in Rome were shaped like garlands or floral crowns and offered during festivals like Floralia, or given to travelers at way stations. These loaves symbolized the passage between stages: youth to adulthood, home to road, confusion to clarity. Janilla says she makes new shapes every week. Last week I made a fish. No one bought it. You nod, respectfully. She hands you a string of rosemary. For your wrist. To confuse the bakers. Obscure tidbit: it was said that wearing rosemary near dough could either bless the bread or hide your intentions from the flour. Depending on who you asked. Some bakers forbade rosemary in their kitchens. Others kept it behind their ears, like a spice-scented sword. You thank her with a bow of exaggerated seriousness. She nods gravely, then returns to tying fennel into figure eights. Historians still debate whether crown breads were widely distributed or just symbolic art pieces. Some scholars believe they were consumed primarily by traveling priests, actors, or social drifters, the kind who needed luck more than structure. You exit the portico with the roll still warm in your palm and a rosemary loop dangling from your wrist like a question. Rome stretches before you. And every step is a little lighter. Even if your pocket now smells faintly of herbs and distant bakery confusion. You walk without purpose now, but with intention, which are very different things. Down past the Pons Aemilius, across the bridge where the Tiber whispers under its breath. The water reflects the afternoon sky like someone forgot to wrinkle it properly. Boats drift lazily downstream, their sails slack and philosophical. The city is quieter in this corner. Not asleep, just leaning back. You find a narrow road that leads uphill toward a familiar building, a modest bakery tucked between two overgrown courtyards. the same one from the start of your journey. Cato's Bakery. The door is half open. The chimney hums like an old lullaby. Cato stands behind the counter, dusted in flour, elbow deep in dough. Wearing the same face as before, a mix of suspicion, competence, and don't touch anything. He sees you. Nods. No words needed. You step in and sit on the bench beside the hearth. He pulls something from the oven. It's a round loaf, scored with a new kind of pattern, a crosshatch on one side, a swirl on the other. A hybrid. A diplomatic bread. He places it in front of you. No charge. No explanation. Major historical fact: while most Roman loaves were practical in shape and design, some bakeries experimented with combination scoring, part religious, part commercial. These rare loaves were often used during festivals that overlapped civic and domestic rituals, meant to appease multiple deities at once. You stare at the loaf. Cato finally speaks. Sometimes, the best you can do is bake for both sides. You nod. There's nothing else to say. He turns back to the oven. You break the loaf gently, and the steam curls out like a sigh of relief. Obscure tidbit: in one surviving Roman play fragment, a baker boasts that he solved a neighborhood feud by inventing a neutral bread, a flat, round loaf with no markings, no symbolism, and no flavor. It became popular with philosophers. You eat slowly. No omens. No dread. No divine correction. Just crust, warmth, and a baker who has long since stopped explaining himself. Historians still debate whether these mixed symbol loaves were deeply meaningful or simply a hedge against divine retaliation. But their presence in records, and in ovens, suggests a quiet Roman belief in balance over certainty. The fire crackles. The bench creaks. And for a moment, it feels like the city itself is holding its breath, then exhaling, gentle and golden. This is the end of your journey. Not because the city is finished, but because the loaf is. You step outside again, and the light is soft, folded gently across rooftops. The air smells of fennel, firewood, and farewell. Everything has slowed. You pass the same alley from before, where a dog once slept and a judgmental woman once swept. The dog is now sitting up, blinking slowly. The woman is nowhere to be seen. Perhaps she's forgiven your sandals. You make your way back toward the shrine of Panis Primigenius, the little niche beneath the vine archway where you left Fausta's spiral loaf. It's empty now. In its place is a single olive and a crust. A fair trade. You sit on the edge of the fountain nearby, where the water speaks in slow syllables. You open your pouch and pull out what's left from your walk: a cracked tile from Felix, a string of rosemary from Junilla, and the faint smell of a dozen bakeries stitched into your clothes. The loaf from Cato is gone now, piece by piece. And still, somehow, you feel full. Major historical fact: bread in ancient Rome was never just sustenance, it was a message. It was law, protest, hope, offering, and greeting. Each loaf, whether stamped, scored, or spiraled, carried a tiny chapter of the city's living book. A soft breeze lifts the edge of your tunic. You let your head fall back and stare up at the sky. Clouds drift. Bells in the distance ring faintly. Someone, somewhere, is lighting their oven for tomorrow. You hear a child laugh. You hear flour being sifted. You hear a loaf cracking gently as it cools. Obscure tidbit. In the margins of one Roman recipe scroll, a note in fading ink reads simply, "If the dough fears you, sing to it." Historians still debate whether this was metaphor or instruction. Either way, it works. You hum. The oven smoke rises above the rooftops like a slow prayer. You let your eyes close. No more superstition. No more spirals. No more choosing a hand. Just silence. And sleep. And bread.